Thank you. If because there's quite a few of us on the program today, if you could remain on your mute button, but if you want to ask a question as you go through, please don't be frightened. Hold up your raise your hand on the chat or put something into the chat and we can answer the question. No questions silly, and I know that the presenters will be more than happy to answer any questions. As usual, we record the session and which will be uploaded onto Caring Support West members area. So to introduce our presenters, I'm delighted to welcome Amy Staff from the Centre of Sustainability of Energy, Simon Stokes from the Business Suppliers Group, and Mark Thomas, the Sustainable Manager from St Thomas Trust. All are very experienced in sustainability and the topic of today. So without further ado, I'm going to let Amy have the floor, the virtual floor. So Amy, over to you. Welcome and thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Right, let me share my screen and hopefully this will work. We did do a test run. Right. Can I just check that you can see my slides and not my notes?
I can see your slides.
Lovely.
Notes.
I can't see any of you, so please just shout at me if you need to. Right, so without further ado, I'll crack on. So yeah, great to meet you all. My name's Amy. I work for the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and I'm going to be talking to you today about what net zero and energy efficiency could look like in social care. So just to give you a little bit of background about the Centre for Sustainable Energy, we are an energy advice charity based in Bristol, although our advice line covers a large part of the southwest. And we do actually have projects that cover the whole of the UK as well. So alongside our energy advice line, we've got a research department and they work very closely with local authorities to kind of support energy policies. And then we've got the local and community empowerment team, which is where I work. And that covers the kind of the engagement side of things. So we work with schools, local authorities and communities to support them to take action around community energy, fuel poverty and retrofit, which is what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So what actually is retrofit? Well, in simple terms, it's the addition of technology or a feature to an existing thing, so fitting something retrospectively. And in terms of buildings, we're typically talking about improvement works to a building's energy efficiency. So why is it important? Well, the way that we produce and use energy is one of the main causes of climate change. And actually around 40% of our emissions in the UK are linked to the built environment. So the longer that we can keep those buildings in use, the better. We also obviously need to change our reliance on fossil fuels, which produce carbon dioxide, generating more energy from renewable resources. So things like heat pumps and solar panels will help with that. Retrofit also has a role to play in reducing the impact of the energy crisis. So it can help us use less energy and also kind of save our kind of fuel bills as well. And then it can also help us undertake that kind of equitable transformation that we need across society. So we're not kind of having people living in kind of cold and damp spaces. Oh, what was that? Sorry? Was there a question?
Yeah, no, I think somebody had their mic on.
Oh, sorry.
If everybody could remain on mute, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Lovely. And just to zoom in a little bit onto social care. So why is retrofit important in social care? Well, a significant portion of things like care homes in the UK are older buildings. And many of these facilities were originally built for other purposes, and they've then kind of been converted into kind of care facilities. And whilst having an older building doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, there's a little bit of a postcode lottery, which kind of will then kind of mean that the condition of the buildings will vary quite a lot. So local authorities actually spent around 22 billion on adult social care alone in 2021 to 2023, and a portion of this budget, not the whole budget, was allocated to maintaining those buildings to make sure that they meet kind of those safety and care standards as well. Now this graph absolutely terrified me when I saw it, but it actually shows the increasing severity of maintenance issues. This is just for NHS buildings, which I appreciate you're not all kind of NHS organisations today, but I would like to draw your attention to the yellow square on the highest column there at the end, which shows that 1.8 billion of severe maintenance issues have been reported in 2021 to 22, where they could lead to things like major disruptions, injury, or kind of failure of those services, which can kind of mean things like things not being fire compliant or not kind of taking correct action to address asbestos. So although retrofit is overlooked, there's actually really not a lot of data out there for kind of the state of buildings in social care. It does have a huge part to play in kind of delivering those quality services. However, not all retrofit was created equal. So a good retrofit will reduce energy and carbon consumption and improve the health and comfort of its occupants. Whereas if it's not been done correctly, it can cause issues sort of like mold growth and things, as well as maybe not reaching those kind of financial and carbon and energy savings as well. As just an example of a poor retrofit here from a government funded scheme, unfortunately. So just to rattle through some retrofit principles, so we cover these in all of our trainings. I do apologise in advance for the amount of information I'm about to hit you with, but hopefully you'll be able to watch it back. But just wanted to introduce you to some of the key concepts. So first up, we have do no harm. So this means not jumping in and adding things to your property before you understand how it works. And it can also mean removing things that might have been added where it maybe wasn't appropriate to do that. Next up, we have repair and maintenance. So simply maintaining your buildings are a really key way to increase both your comfort and the fuel efficiency of your building, because you're giving your building the chance to work as effectively as possible. And a properly maintained property can actually save you up to 40% in energy consumption. So it's a simple thing, often overlooked, but really important to get right. Moving on to the energy hierarchy. So this is just kind of a principle where we kind of promote changing energy behaviours first to reduce your energy demand where it's possible before undertaking kind of changes to the building and your sort of space and water heating, and then kind of focusing on energy generation last of all. Moving on to the whole building approach. So this is just an appreciation of how your building works as a system. So it's best not to kind of focus on an individual element or a room, because anything you do will change kind of how heat and moisture moves around the space. Looking at assessments and monitoring. So this is just an understanding that every building is different. Just to give an example, even for all intents and purposes, two buildings on a housing estate built at the same time, if they are owned by an elderly couple and by a family with 3 children, those buildings will be different because they'll be used in very different ways. And then lastly for this slide, just a little bit of myth busting around what we call fabric first. So it's used quite a lot in the retrofit world, and it does mean different things to different people. And we just want to point out that it doesn't mean you necessarily need to cover your property in polystyrene before it could be suitable for a heat pump, but it does kind of mean making those targeted improvements where it's safe and appropriate and practical to do so, thinking about that kind of whole building approach. So we've got 2 types of buildings typically in the UK. So we've got the traditional buildings that you see on the left-hand side there. So those are characterised by the thick walls that you see and using breathable materials. So they're designed to get wet, but because the walls are really thick, in theory, the water should never come all the way through. It's allowed to kind of dry out. And then on the right-hand side there, you can see our modern kind of cavity wall. So it's characterised by those 2 layers of brick with a gap in the middle, and uses things kind of like brick and cement. So the premise with this one is if moisture kind of gets into that first layer, it can run down the gap in the middle and drain out that way. So just to kind of highlight the importance of understanding your building before doing things, the eagle-eyed among you will have spotted that this is a traditional building again. But if we have a little look at the picture on the right hand side, you'll see that the gutter is leaking, and also that it's been fitted with a cement render, which is non-breathable. So what's happening in this instance is the guttering is actually leaking backwards into the wall, and then once it's in, it can't get out. So it's actually starting to rot the timbers in the roof. So again, just to emphasize, really important to understand how your building works before kind of going in with any retrofit measures. So that's the kind of theory out the way. Where do we sort of start in terms of action? Well, we'd always recommend starting with a building survey, so you can again better understand how your building works, what kind of conditions it's in, and what sort of things might be appropriate for it. So at the Centre for Sustainable Energy, we've developed a DIY survey that you can use for this. So just to kind of have a little flick through some of the pages, I've linked it on the slides here, so you can go away and have a play with it afterwards if you're so inclined. Some of the questions you might kind of not know the answers to, some of them you will. So things like, is your building listed? And then it just kind of asks lots of simple questions, kind of like, are there any damp issues? Is it too hot in summer? That kind of thing. And then we kind of go through several pages looking at, you know, for instance, what kind of conditions are the doors and windows in? Are you using halogen light bulbs? How is the building used? That kind of thing. And I just want to run quickly through a little case study. So this was an example done by my colleague, Steve. He's our retrofit projects manager. And yeah, he's spent around 20 years in construction, so he's a lot more knowledgeable than I am. But yeah, he did a survey for the James Hopkins Trust, which is a respite care facility for children in Gloucester, so not too far from here. So the building's actually on the newer side. It was built in 2002 with an extension in 2015. So just to go through a few pictures, which I will get my laser pointer out to show you. So this picture on the left-hand side shows a gutter that is clean but leaking, which is causing damp issues on the inside. And then this picture on the right here, which shows the Velux window and the seal isn't functional. So that's also creating damp problems as well. Next up, we've got some images taken with a thermal imaging camera. So these are used to detect where areas of heat is being lost. So we're looking for the purpley bluey areas. Those are the colder spots. So here, where my laser is, this is where there's a gap in the loft insulation. Quite a common thing that we see, potentially if you've had lights put in and an electrician has maybe shoved the insulation out the way and hasn't put it back. That will then create a cold spot. So something that is quite sort of easily remediable. And this, interestingly, was actually on their extension. There was no insulation in this bit at all, which I thought was quite interesting. And then just another little bit. Hopefully this image on the right-hand side doesn't look too scary. This just kind of involves asking some of the building occupants what they sort of think of the building. So is the building, does it feel kind of fresh or is it quite stuffy? That kind of thing. And then at the end, there's kind of a place on the survey for you to input kind of different actions. So for instance, so Steve's written all of this, but yeah, so with the gutters, to kind of get a look at having those fixed, have a little look at the damp brick and kind of get a professional in to look at that, filling in gaps in the insulation and resealing the window. So just want to reiterate again the importance of maintenance, and it doesn't need to be kind of big, shiny, really expensive things to do. Right, so we've done our survey, we've done our maintenance, and now we can look at appropriate retrofit measures and their costs. So things like insulation and energy generation are kind of those typically high to medium cost, whereas things like draft proofing still really impactful but lower down the scale. So there's a lot of kind of different options here for people. So just rattling through, talking about some insulation. So it's typically added to lofts, walls and floors. And just to reiterate again that insulation does fundamentally change the way heat and moisture moves through your building. And importantly, adding insulation doesn't solve damp problems. Trapped moisture in the wall is still trapped moisture, and that needs to be addressed first. And just important to say as well that some places are easier and less risky than others. So as I mentioned before, kind of making sure that it's consistent around loft light fittings, and also ensuring ventilation is maintained can make it a little bit tricky sometimes. And it's actually, contrary to maybe popular belief, better to do a thinner layer of insulation, but to make sure that it's consistent rather than having really thick patches in some places and nothing in others, because it will create those cold spots, which is where you can then get kind of mold issues like that. And wanted to highlight as well, apologies, the graph isn't very clear, but this shows wind-driven rain across the UK and can really affect whether or not cavity wall insulation is suitable for homes. This is insulation that goes in that gap in a modern building. But as you can see, the southwest, we get very severe wind-driven rain, which after the last few days, I'm sure won't be surprising to any of you. But basically, if someone that had cavity wall insulation sort of lives in that area, it means that if water gets through that first layer of brick and into the cavity, and that cavity is then filled, it'll get wet and it will stay wet, which will cause damp problems. And a damp wall is a cold one. It will often draw heat out of the building, in fact. And just a quick note about insulating floors. So we don't tend to recommend this really unless you're kind of doing major works anyway, because it's really disruptive. And things like a thermal underlay for under a carpet is a lot kind of less disruptive, and it's removable if you ever need to kind of pull it up for whatever reason. Moving on to windows and doors. So how well windows are fitted really can impact on their thermal performance. Drafts can make a house or a building feel a lot colder even if it isn't, and are responsible for around 15% of heat loss. So again, can have a really big impact. So things like secondary glazing, curtains and draft proofing can really improve thermal comfort, which I'm sure will be really, really important to all of you, as I know you'll be working with lots of vulnerable people. And the DIY kind of draft proofing kit you can get from stores like B&Q. It doesn't have to be sort of, again, super shiny, super expensive. Looking a little bit outdoors, I appreciate this isn't always practical, but where you can, getting a porch is really one of the best things you can do for reducing impact of heat loss through things like a letterbox, or if you've got your main door where people are kind of coming in and out all the time, it's good to kind of reduce heat loss there. And just a note about windows as well. So often cheap double glazing doesn't last very long. And then once the kind of double glazing is sort of bust, if you like, once the seal's gone, it is effective as single glazing. So worth kind of spending the money, but also maybe not when you're looking at triple glazing, because you never get, although you do get some sort of increased energy savings, because they are so expensive, they never pay back in terms of the money you spent on them in the first place, or in terms of carbon either. And yeah, moving on to energy generation. So although people think heat pumps are new, they've actually been around since the 1800s, and everyone has one already in their home at the back of your fridge. So these work by using a small amount of electricity to heat your home gently for longer, using larger radiators on a lower heat to enhance energy efficiency, rather than kind of turning it on and off as we're used to in the UK. And they do tend to last around 20 years, so typically 5 to 10 years longer than a gas boiler. And we actually tend to recommend in our retrofit team switching to a heat pump where possible for vulnerable people, because it removes the risk of kind of poor air quality issues that can kind of come with gas boilers, sort of things like the risk of carbon monoxide, etc. I've got a little video here, which, just in the interest of time, I've just popped it in so people can have a little look at it afterwards, or if we've got time at the end, maybe we can show it. But I'll just finish off my slides first. And then, yeah, this will be the last slide, just to talk a little bit about solar. So although it seems like quite a quick and easy thing to do when talking about kind of improving their building and making it more energy efficient, it's really important to think about your circumstances, because other measures might be easier and cheaper to implement. So we've got two different types of solar. So we've got solar PV, which is a lot more common. So that's kind of where you get your electricity from the sun. And then solar thermal is where you get you use kind of the heat to heat your hot water tank. So kind of in order to maximize those benefits, it's really important to only install what you can use or divert to heat hot water if you've got that solar thermal. Since they got rid of the feed-in tariff, unfortunately, you don't get a lot back from feeding into the grid. And just kind of making sure as well that you're not installing panels where there's shading from other buildings or trees. And we've actually just launched a free new tool called Solar Wizard, which I've linked on the slides here for you. And it uses your postcode to explore the solar potential of your building. So, and kind of shows you how much money you could save as well. There's also another little video here, which you can watch back afterwards, which just kind of goes through the tool in a little bit more detail. But yeah, it's not just for domestic properties, it's also for commercial ones as well. So do check that out. And I've also linked Big Solar Co-op on here as well. So they are actually funding solar installations on medium and large size roofs. So anything from factories to doctors' surgeries to community buildings. And they're doing that through nationwide share offers. So the electricity is sold back to the building by Big Solar Co-op for a cheaper rate. So it saves those buildings money on their electric, and those people that have invested get a 5% return on their investment. And what's really great, I think, as well, is that the solar panels are actually still owned by Big Solar. So that actually means that they are required to maintain them for like the 30-year contract that you sign up for. So something to maybe look into if interested. And yeah, just a note as well to finish to say that it is good to be mindful about embodied carbon, as although solar panels do save carbon on electricity, lots of kind of carbon is used to make them in the first place. So just to summarise, so yeah, start with the survey, do your maintenance before your measures, and not all measures need to be all singing, all dancing. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. If you've got any questions, please forward them to this inbox. So my colleague Steve, as I said, he's very, very experienced in construction. So if you've got any really technical questions, if you pop them in this inbox, I can make sure that he gets those. And yes, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Amy. That was well, I've got loads of questions myself. For everybody on the panel, Amy's going to stay behind afterwards or towards the end and going to share the videos that she mentioned. Simon is our next speaker, and I know he's got a bit of a timeline because he's got to go off to another meeting. So if that's okay, if you've got questions, make a note of them, and then we can go back to Amy and well, maybe there'll be questions for everybody, I should think, but I've got loads of questions. I don't know. So, but I'm going to let Simon have the virtual floor, and then we come back to you, Amy. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Simon, over to you.
Thanks, Karen. This is not going to be as technical as Amy's presentation, I've got to say, because my title within the Business Supplies Group is Sales Manager. So for the very nature, I'm probably doing a job that you don't need a lot of technical ability for. But what I do understand, I was asked to be part of this from Karen after we sent a blog into Karen just explaining how as a business we've achieved carbon neutral status and how important that is to us and the kind of journey that we follow. We're not in the care sector per se, we supply the care sector as well as many other businesses. The Business Supplies Group, we do everything from PPE to office products, office furniture, almost anything you can think of for an office environment and a business environment. So I will try and not be too salesy because that's my natural leaning. I'll try and just explain to you the process we went through, why we felt it was important to us as a business, and just some of the actions that we're taking as a business going forward. Like I said, it won't be as technical as Amy's presentation, but if you do have any questions, as long as they're nice and simple, I can probably answer them. I'll see if I can now share my screen with you. That's a good start. That's the wrong one. So bear with me 1 second.
Don't worry, we have time. We're all friends together here. This is a nice thing about virtual workshops. We are all friends together, and it takes the pressure off. I think it makes it easier for everybody. You don't have to travel. You can stay in your office. Although we do have a workshop which is going to be face-to-face on the 6th of November. So whilst you're on here, make a note for your diaries, please. In the morning, it's going to be at the Resound Centre and that's going to be a really interesting one. I think we're going to be covering safeguarding, and we're going to be covering some other really interesting topics. So, and it's the AGM for Care and Support West, which is really important because we need to keep going. So, how you doing, Simon? You okay?
I think we might have lost him.
I was going to say, I think he's gone.
We didn't scare him away, did we?
I don't. He'll
He
probably
may have
come
pressed
back.
the wrong button. Yeah.
I think
I'll
he's
keep an eye
probably
out for
has.
him.
Oh, bless.
I wonder if anyone
Amy.
has questions for Amy, or in the meantime,
Yeah,
we should do
yeah,
those.
that's a brilliant idea. Anybody got questions? Anybody at all? Anybody want to open up and ask, or should I fire at some of my questions? Okay, I'm going to ask a question. You mentioned the building survey, the DIY. Is it free, or is there a charge for that, Amy? Is there?
Yeah, it's completely free. It's on our website. Yeah, every kind of resource that we try and make at CSE, we try and make open source, so as many people can kind of access that as possible. And yeah, the Solar Wizard tool is also free as well.
Okay, that's brilliant. Another question. I mean, the heat pump. I must say, my daughter has got a heat pump tumble dryer, and she
Oh,
says it costs her pennies to run. And I'm really fascinated by it because, you know, we all know tumble dryers usually cost a lot of money to run. So I mean, that's a hell of a saving. So yeah, but I didn't realise there was a heat pump in the back of my fridge. Gosh.
yeah, they're really old technology. They've been around for a long time. I think they're just kind of getting popular again in the UK. But yeah, they've been, you know, lots of Nordic countries use them, so they've been around for a long time. Yeah.
Brilliant. Simon, are you back
Well, I'm
with us?
so sorry. I think we had some technical issues. Do you want to carry on with your questions, and I'll see if I can get this sorted out and come straight back to you? I'm really sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. As long yeah, don't panic. Yeah, we can talk for a little while. You
Yeah, that's
do what
fine.
you need
So
to do.
sorry.
You do know we can see the future sustainable actions.
Yeah, that's not the presentation. That's kind of some slides for it, but that's not the one that
Right.
we prepared for
Okay.
you. So if you give me a couple of minutes, I'll see if I can get this sorted out
Yeah,
for you.
that's fine. Okay.
Sorry.
Stop sharing then, and we'll carry on with so Amy, the solar panels. You mentioned that the co-op maintains solar panels if you purchase them through there. I've read somewhere something about once you do that, your roof belongs to the solar panel company. Is that a myth, or is that something that is?
I mean, obviously, I can't sort of speak for all solar panel companies. I've worked with Big Solar Co-op on one of my other projects that I work on, and yeah, they don't own the roof. They own the panels, which some people might kind of take as a negative thing, but actually, yeah, say it means that they maintain them, and you know, in places where like people have got like limited capacity and kind of limited funding, it's actually really good because it means that they're going to kind of be working as efficiently as possible for a long time.
Okay, and you mentioned that there are two different types. One that heats your water tank, and that's all it does. And then the other one is the electric. Is that for the grid? Is that how it works?
So yeah, the solar thermal heats your hot water, and then the solar PV. The solar PV is typically kind of, if you see someone that's got solar panels on their roof, that's what you see. And yeah, they use the heat from the sun to generate electricity for your building, and then any excess will kind of then go back into the grid, which is why it's kind of good to connect to the grid, so you can kind of always balance that energy. Equally, if you'd it is also good though, although it's recommended obviously to connect to the grid, to have, you know, potentially things like batteries or kind of the solar thermal, so you can like divert electricity that you don't use, and sort of you still have that, you're not kind of sort of losing it to the grid in effect.
Friends of ours have got it, and I know that they've had it for about 7 years now, and they reckon only now they paid for their panels, and they reckon they are now only just reaping the benefit from they got free electricity basically, so from now, so it does in the long run pay. Another thing I was interested, you mentioned trapped moisture in walls. You may not know the answer to this, but if it's trapped in the walls, how do you get it out? is it something that you have? I'm not building technically, so just sort of, I've got this vision of moisture being in the walls and just staying there, basically.
Well, that's what's kind of happening in a lot of buildings in the UK. That's why a lot of buildings are damp. So that image that I showed you in the beginning with an old building kind of having that cement render on the outside, the first step, if you've got moisture trapped in there, would be to remove the cement render so the walls can dry out. Would be kind of step one.
It's all very useful stuff. Does anybody have any questions? I mean, I'm sorry.
There is in the chat, Karen. So we got any advice for retrofit to a Grade 2 listed building?
Oh, is there any sort of thing specific? Any specific advice you're looking for? Sorry, I couldn't get my words out then.
No, it's just as part of our estates across 2 of our sites, we've got Grade 2 listed buildings, and the response I normally get back, oh, there's not very much you're going to be able to do about this. And I was just curious to hear your experience and whether you've worked with Grade 2 listed buildings, and actually, are there things that can be done? I've heard about the latest variety of heat pumps, obviously much better than what they were a few years ago. Secondary double glazing that can be put quite close to the pane and can follow the symmetry of the leaded windows, so you don't really see it from the outside. I'm just curious, really, whether you've had any experience of that and what you would recommend.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people get put off when they've got a listed building because it's a little bit more challenging to kind of get those retrofit measures put in, just because you need permission. But in actual fact, I think that's actually kind of a good thing, because it really kind of makes people stop and think about what, kind of, again, how their building works before kind of doing that. So most local authorities, I believe, have a buildings conservation officer or kind of some sort of title along those lines that I'd recommend kind of getting in touch with. And yeah, secondary glazing is often kind of what we'd recommend for kind of Grade 2 listed buildings if you're kind of looking for to get kind of less heat loss from your windows. And yeah, heat pumps as well. I mean, there's actually lots of heat pumps on kind of National Trust buildings, so yeah, they're definitely suitable as well. I can also put you in touch with my colleague Steve, because traditional buildings are, and especially listed buildings, are like his thing. So if you've got any specific technical questions, I can put you in touch with him if that's useful. I'm still fairly new to the retrofit world, but yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Amy.
Thank you. That's really good. If anybody would like to be in contact with Steve, if you want to put your email into the chat, then I can let Amy have that, and then she will connect you with Steve. Simon, how are you doing?
I am sorted now. I'm so sorry. I think the
Lovely.
PowerPoint presentation was corrupted in some way, so I've had to kind of reinstall it, and it's working now. I've just checked it, so hopefully you should be able to see this now.
Brilliant. Okay, so you have the virtual floor. Over to you.
Thank you. So hopefully you will be able to see this. Let's just move that. Oh, my apologies. Still not working quite right. Bear with me 1 second. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry about it, everybody. Normally this works well.
Don't worry.
Struggling with this screen. I think I'm going to have to do it in the format that is there. So hopefully you can see that. For some reason, the bottom pane of my screen has now disappeared. So I went some kind of IT glitches. So really, I just wanted to talk through why being carbon neutral to us as a business was important, how we went down that process to achieve that accreditation, and the actions that we're taking going forward to make sure that all of the business and our employees kind of buy into that process. It's all about sustainability. The main drivers, if I'm being honest, were the fact that our customers more and more asking about sustainability. When we were being asked to tender for business, it was almost like a prerequisite now. I think going back 10, 15 years ago, the sustainability question on a tender was really a kind of nice to have rather than an essential. And I think that has changed massively. What we're finding is you can get precluded from dealing with businesses, particularly in the public sector, if you don't have the proper green credentials. And there's a lot of kind of greenwashing out there as well, where it used to be you could have a kind of eco policy, but you didn't really have to back it up at all. You didn't have to provide any evidence that you were following that eco route. So that's the kind of driver behind us as a business going down this route. Plus, the owners of the business are very kind of eco-minded anyway, so I think that's helped the situation. So what we decided to do back in beginning part of last year, we actually started this in 2022, was look at how we achieve kind of carbon neutral status. By the very nature of our business, we've got vans driving all over the place. We've got sales teams out on the road. We've got a print production facility in Bristol. We've got a kind of workwear production facility up in the Midlands. So it was a bit of a kind of head scratcher. How did we achieve that? The most straightforward way of doing that we found was to engage an independent assessor to assess our CO emissions, and then off the back of that do carbon offsetting, which is then investing in ecologically sound projects around the world that will then offset that carbon usage. In an ideal world, we'd like to work towards being net zero, but how practical that is, all we can do is make steps going forward to make sure that we're doing as much as we can within our business, and that message is being drilled into all the sales, all of our employees. We achieved our carbon neutral certificate, which has been in place for most of this year, and you can see from that, after a kind of quite in-depth assessment, it looked at everything from our straightforward stuff like our utility bills, how much we're spending on electricity and gas and heating and all those type of things, as well as the amount of travel that our delivery vehicles were doing, as well as our sales team, their kind of journeys, etc. Factoring all those factors in, and then coming up with our CO2 emissions, which they total 437 tonnes of carbon dioxide. That will be moving on again over the next 2 or 3 years as our business expands, but it's a process that we're going through on an ongoing basis. So off the back of that, we identified 3 projects that we wanted to invest, which then gives you the offset figures there, which total the 437 tonnes of carbon dioxide. And from our point of view, from when we're looking at developing new business relationships, the fact that we can kind of prove this to end users and our customers really kind of stands us in good stead. And I think it's now become ingrained in our culture within the business. Everybody kind of thinks about the sustainability angle and everything that they do. We encourage our teams to come forward with ideas on a regular basis as well, because little things can add up. What are we doing to reduce our footprint as a business? There are some major projects that we already have in hand as a business. First and foremost, what we're doing now, it's meetings over Teams and over Zoom, etc., rather than jumping in a car, travelling half around the country to go and meet somebody, burning fossil fuels to get there, and then driving all the way back again. And I think now what we found is there's a far more accepting culture of doing those online meetings as well, which has made it a lot easier for us to roll that out. So we've got a sales team of 40 odd salespeople across the country. Vast majority of their meetings are over Teams, and if we do a kind of face-to-face meeting, we try and make that as economical as possible, in terms of making sure we maximise that day. We're not just travelling to one point and then back. We're tying in a lot of other meetings with that at the same time. And on that subject of travel, as a business, we're investing in predominantly EV vehicles. There are some hybrids on the fleet. We've got some legacy vehicles on our fleet, which are kind of, they're clean diesels, but we want to get rid of those over time. They're on kind of extended leases. So as those leases expire, we're replacing all our company cars that are being used with EV alternatives. And again, that has an impact on our CO2 emissions when we do our kind of carbon testing, etc. We've also rolled out an EV scheme to our employees that are not company car drivers, but there's an incentive there in a salary replacement, which means they get discounted rates on leasing EV vehicles through the business that they wouldn't be able to get at a kind of personal level. So again, we're kind of encouraging that, and we've got electric charge points at all our major sites across the country. In addition to the kind of EV solutions, etc., we're looking at and very close to securing solar panels on both of our two major warehouse locations, with a view to, I mean, obviously, if we can get to net zero, that would be great, but this is a big step towards that. If we're kind of off grid and producing our own electricity, it's far better for us as a business. The two sites that we would have that on in Bristol, which is where our print facility is, which is quite power thirsty when we're running presses all day long. And I think we are now, we've finalised details with the landlords on the building that they're allowing us to do that. So that will be going ahead. I think the project is due to go ahead the last quarter of this year in Bristol. And then Portsmouth, our other main site, will be closely followed up behind them. Talking about earlier about getting our employees to buy into this whole process. We encourage on a regular basis kind of team meetings to get together to come up with any ideas that will have an impact, an environmental impact on the way we do business. And it can be really small things, but they all add up. I mean, we've implemented a kind of cycle to work scheme where a lot of people that live within a close proximity to our office are now encouraged to ride a bike to work. We've got incentives in place which we help fund bicycles and kind of all the safety wear to go with that. And we've got a safe covered shelter outside where the bicycles are safe during the day. So that has an impact. It's less of those short journeys. We've got a car share initiative as well, where we help with the cost of that if we're encouraging people to kind of share a car to come to work. Even things like, and this was brought up by one of our employees, using reusable steel water bottles rather than single-use plastic. So, you know, we've all got our own, well, they are branded, so it's kind of sales pitch, but our own branded steel water bottles and various other initiatives that are out there. Biodegradable packaging, we try and use that wherever possible. Recycling of all our cardboard, plastics and waste. We've got low energy lighting all around the buildings. Light sensors in the warehouse, so the lights only come on when there's any activity in that area, and the rest of the time those lights are off. In our print production process, we're trying to get away from, we're using solvent-free inks now. We're making sure that all the paper we use is FSC accredited. So there are a lot of initiatives there. This is just some of them that the employees have come up with. But what it's done, it's developed a culture within the business where people are thinking about this regularly. You know, it used to be, you used to have to force them into having that discussion, whereas now they're coming to us with ideas, which works really, really well. On the other side of that, that's what we're doing. In terms of how we supply into our marketplace, it's how do we help our customers reduce their CO2 impact. That's more of a tricky one. I mean, all we can do really, we provide a report to our customers, which is gives them delivery stats on how many deliveries we do into them, how frequently we deliver to them, and what the impact is on those deliveries. And what we push with a lot of customers, rationalising those deliveries. So we're doing less deliveries to them, more products on the vans, so that their impact is less. And we will provide them with ongoing reports which show the impact that they're having by doing that. And that again, that's worked really well with local authorities. It's helping drive that efficiency through, so that and because we're providing data off the back of that and reports on a regular basis, that's all auditable. It all kind of ticks a box for them, so that they've got another process that they followed, which helps towards their green credentials as well. And on a kind of product level, we've got a load within our product range that we offer. There are a load of products out there which are far more environmentally friendly. And again, we try and push our customers towards that road now. There used to be a real disparity in price. That pricing is getting closer and closer now. It's far easier from a commercial point of view for customers to make the decision to move to a greener product now, because the price disparity is closer than it used to be. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, if you wanted to buy green, it would cost you money to do that. That is less the case now, because I think all the manufacturers are realising if they don't have green options, then they're probably not going to sell their products going forward or in any volume. This just really backs up what I was saying about the environmental products. When customers go to order online, they can select a filter on there which gives them a more eco-friendly option as opposed to a kind of perhaps a market-leading product. But then we're empowering the customers to do that, and we back that up with the eco reports that we provide. And green audits, we offer those to new customers, whereas if they're buying a raft of products at the moment, we can go in and give them advice on the impact that we could have on their current spending by buying a more environmentally sound alternative. So my apologies if that seemed a bit salesy towards the end. It was quite difficult to kind of come up with a lot of detail on our journey, but really, I mean, from our point of view as a business, it pays dividends for us to be going down that route, because it means that we're not precluding ourselves from dealing with local authorities, with larger businesses, where that's a key kind of driver, really. So thank you for your time. Sorry about the technical issues at the start. If you've got any questions, then please feel free to ask.
Simon, that was brilliant, and no need for apologies for salesy. You weren't salesy at all. But no, I find that really interesting, and we can all look to sort of what we're doing, and I've written down loads of sort of notes. But before I sort of get going, does anybody else have any questions for Simon? What? Oh, there's one. Amy? Yeah.
Thanks, Simon. That was really great and really lovely to hear about all the work that you're doing. I just wondered if you were looking into at all the emissions from, I know you mentioned you do a lot of your client meetings online now, but kind of the emissions from remote meetings versus traveling. It's something we're kind of trying to wrap our heads around at the moment. I just wondered if you'd kind of looked into that at all.
Well, in terms of the impact that that's actually had.
In terms of the emissions generated from having meetings online, kind of in like the IT realm versus kind of in person, and how they compare.
No, I mean, I suppose really what we looked at was the journeys that we're having as kind of sales teams, and encouraging our sales teams to think about doing virtual meetings first and foremost rather than face to face. So it was a fairly straightforward calculation to work out kind of fuel costs, travel costs, all of that type of thing. I mean, it's having a slightly less impact because all our sales team now drive EV vehicles, but there is still an impact there. So I think from that point of view, I would say 90% of the meetings that we have now are virtual. They are online. They're in IT suites, etc. And we've also there's a lot of resistance to that as a business. I mean, from our point of view, in the sales realm, you want to press the flesh. You want to meet people in person because that's the best way of developing relationships. But I think there was a lot of resistance to that initially, whereas I think that's now become far more the norm. And we're finding that we are still managing to build relationships going forward. Whereas before we probably would have done a monthly meeting with a customer face to face, we probably do that once or twice a year now. And then in between, it's virtual meetings because of that impact. But also, it's not just carbon footprint; it's efficiency as well. You're not having to travel from one point to the next. You can probably get in 3 or 4 times as many meetings in a day as you would do if you were traveling. So I think, I don't know whether that really answers your question or not, but
no, it does. Thank you.
It's all right.
That's it's a good point when you think about. So at the moment, there's 18 of us here. We're all using electricity. We're all using our computers, and I guess there's some sort of emission. I mean, I'm not technical, so I don't know these things, but I'm guessing there is some sort of like emissions coming out of our computers that is in relation to sort of like the. But I agree with Simon. I mean, from what we're experiencing as well, the preferred way is to actually meet virtually because we've all become accustomed to. It's something that in the very beginning it was very difficult for us. People didn't like talking in, to sort of like a screen, but I think we've all become very accustomed to doing that. So, and going the way forward. Simon, I've written down a few sort of just very quick sort of things that that we can all take away really, and you relate it to your business, but it's something that we can relate to all our businesses. Culture change. The certificate of carbon neutrality, that's proof to suppliers, proof to service users. 436 tons. I'm always amazed how that can be measured, but don't answer that because that's probably too long. I really
I'm not
don't
the
know how that can
technical
be
person,
measured.
so don't ask me.
Yeah. Yeah, encouraging the teams, encouraging the employees. I mean, that comes back to culture change. So we do a lot of that within social care. That's, this is the whole point of today's meeting, is within social care there is a lot of employees, there's a lot of organisations, there's a lot of homes, there's a lot of areas that can support becoming greener. And car sharing, as I like the idea of you helping employees to sort of gain the cars, but that's another story. So, Simon, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sorry that you had a little bit of a hiccup, but you've overcome it very well.
Like I said, technology is not my thing, so I must apologise. But yeah, what I'll do is I'll send you the presentation anyway,
All right,
Karen, so you've got that.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, it was about changing the culture in our business.
All right, before you go, if you'd like to put your contact into the chat, and if anybody would like to make contact with Simon to sort of take up any offers that he might have on, please feel free to do so. All right, is that fair? Yeah.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay.
That's great. Lovely.
All right. Thank you, Simon.
Nice to virtually meet you all. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Right, Mark, the virtual floor is yours. And are you okay to go?
Yeah,
Mark's,
if you pop up my slide for me, my first slide, that'd be great, Karen.
I will do. And
I was just going to say, one of the things I remember reading about was talking about Amy's question a moment ago, was that it saves a lot of energy, people not having their cameras on. So I was always like, oh no, you must have your cameras on, we want to see your faces. But actually it saves a lot of energy, people not having their cameras on.
hang on.
Just as an aside.
Just a little manual detail, 2 seconds. I pressed the wrong button now and I've lost your slide. So 2 seconds.
That's
I'll have to find
it.
Carry on talking. Oh goodness me, what have I done with that? Let me why did I do that?
Just through fear of actually shut all of my programs down.
No, okay, okay. Let me
While you're doing that, Karen, I was just going to say, I'm going to have to skip to the next meeting shortly, but it's been really useful today. I think some really great ideas, and especially for social care, like I said, we're having to really start to bring this to our forefront, and it's a lot of the questions that are coming up on a lot of the tenders that we're now doing, especially, like I said, like local authority engagement and things like that. So it's really useful. So thank you to the speakers, and apologies, I can't stay for the whole rest of the meeting.
Well, you can it's been recorded, so everybody's going to have a laugh when they listen to the recording of what's gone wrong. Thank you, Alicia. Mark, can you see your screen?
I can. Yeah,
Right,
I've just noticed as well, great typo on that first slide, nat zero. So
Move it on
I'm
quickly,
talking about net zero. So thanks very much for everyone having me today. To give you a bit of background, we've joined Planet Mark, which is like a business certification scheme, probably similar to the scheme that Simon's organisation are a part of. So they do measuring our carbon footprint, and that's independent, and they give us a report. So it's not us massaging numbers. We couldn't be accused of greenwashing or anything because it's done by an external party. And we did that for a few years, and that was measuring our scope 1, 2, and our core scope 3 emissions. So again, very similar to the slide that Simon popped up. And then really because we were struggling financially as an organisation, that got ended, our relationship with Planet Mark, and Then COVID came along, and really nobody wanted to talk about sustainability. And then after COVID, our chief exec wanted to come up with a 10-year strategy for the organisation. Felt that, you know, all these sort of 3-year strategies, 5-year strategies were too short term, and that actually we needed something that looked much further on into the distance. And really that kind of saved my bacon, you know, working in sustainability, because they did a lot of stakeholder comms, and all in all, I think they had 1,350 responses. And one of the key themes that came back was that stakeholders wanted the trust to have environment and sustainability as part of its 10-year strategy. So when I was asked what I felt that entailed, my overriding thought was, well, how do we get to net zero for an organisation like ours? It's one hell of a challenge, as Simon alluded to. 2050 sounds like a long time away, but I've worked for St Monica's now for 20 odd years, and I can still remember my first day. And I just know that the next 26 odd years is gonna fly by pretty quickly. So, you know, we talked about it, you know, a roadmap to net zero, and I spoke to Planet Mark, and at the same time there was a piece of compliance work that we had to do that some other people might have to do as well, called the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, or ESOS for short. So we could have just taken the option of doing just a compliance piece really, and just doing 5 or 6 sites, and energy auditing them and filing that with DESNZ or whoever it is at government that receives the information, just, you know, over the portal. Or we chose to audit, I think, 18 or 19 of our buildings, so nearly all of them. And we did that at the same time as Planet Mark were working on the net zero transition plan. So we could have the next slide, please, Karen. So Planet Mark identified the categories relevant to us as an organisation. We used 2022 data as the work started in September 23, and they obviously needed a full 12 months of data. Hopefully that kind of graphic kind of makes sense to people, but obviously they looked at scope 1, which for us is mainly our gas consumption. We buy around about 8 or 9 gig of gas per year. Electricity, we buy about 4 gig, which is via Ecotricity at the moment for a couple of years. They looked at then all our scope 3 emissions, the relevant ones. Data was a real challenge, so capital goods got lumped in with purchase goods and services. Business travel data was a real challenge for us, trying to find bits, because we just don't have like separate code just for business travel. Employee commuting, we just didn't really have a clue. We had to do a survey of staff, and then had to work really, really hard to get enough responses back. Leased assets for us, absolutely massive, because we've got loads and loads of retirement flats that are either sold on a lease purchase basis or are rented either via a social rent or privately rented. And then something that, you know, some charities will have is that we have a large endowment fund, which is worth around £300 million. It's invested in commercial assets like farms and commercial buildings, and then a lot of investment funds, and that was a real challenge for us. Karen, have the next slide, please. So this is our baseline carbon footprint. So you can see how, you know, the impact of the natural gas that we buy there. That's nearly all of that 1.49% figure. Purchase goods and services, if we didn't have a really big number against investments, that would probably be around 60 to 70% of our carbon emissions. And that's really why Simon's presentation a moment ago is so important, that it's your suppliers that are actually going to have a big say on an organization's carbon footprint. And then, as I've touched upon, downstream leased assets is a biggie for us. And then our investments is massive. But because our endowment fund is looked after externally, that's not something that I need to kind of get involved in on a day-to-day basis. The people that look after endowment will have that as their challenge to deal with over the next 26 years. If we disregard the investments, you can see that things like employee commuting would actually probably be like 5 or 6% of our carbon footprint. So that was really good to hear what Simon was saying about that they've worked really, really hard to encourage people to make the switch from diesel and petrol over to EV. Kind of the next slide, please, Karen. So Planet Mark's net zero transition plan put forward the following near-term targets. So that's the 2030. So those of you familiar with the Paris Agreement will understand that you can't just save all the activity until sort of the night before 2050 comes along. Part of that agreement is that we've got to get on it quick, and we've got to halve emissions by 2030. So their near-term targets were a reduction in absolute scope 1 and 2 emissions by 45% by 2030. Suppliers 67% to have net zero targets by 2030, and then that reduction in downstream leased assets by half. Have the next slide, please, Karen. So because we'd done all the ESOS work, that first near-term target actually wasn't particularly scary. They came up with, I think, around about £2 million worth of actions, the sorts of things that I guess Amy advised on, you know, improving insulation, adding solar panels, you know, improving fabric of buildings, etc., etc. But we actually had an action plan then ready to roll for that, and we have, best part of 5 or 6 years to deliver that. Purchase goods and services for us is really, really tricky. We don't have a procurement manager, procurement team, any central function for procurement, so no policies, anything like that. So that's a real challenge for us. We're also partway through embedding Workday in the organisation. So our finance team have switched to that. And I think last month was the first time we got paid using the Workday data. So, a horrible time really to have that kind of target thrust upon you. And then the final one, reduction in downstream leased assets. So this is all our flats. I say all our flats. The ones we're particularly bothered about with downstream lease assets is where we don't procure the gas and electricity as St Monica Trust, and it's where our residents do. So we have around about 300 gas boilers across our 5 sites, but there will be a concentration of them. So at our Westbury Fields site, for instance, I know there's 150 odd flats there that all got an individual gas boiler. That if we're going to decarbonise, then we need to be moving away from that and probably over to air source heat pumps, which is the most likely solution for now. Next slide, please, Karen.
There is a question in the chat. I can't see
Oh.
it, but I don't know if you want to answer,
yeah,
Amy.
I'll have a look.
Or Amy's got her hand up, I think.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I pressed the hand button by mistake. I was supposed to be going woohoo to heat pumps and raised my hand instead.
Woohoo! Good stuff. Okay, so yeah, downstream leased assets. Sorry about the boring title, but it's what we call it. So one of the actions was internal procurement systems. We had to improve them, and there's one key word, and it's data. And when you start this process, one of the things you really get thrust in your face is that having all this information is really, really hard, and that there is normally massive gaps. You don't have the sub-metering that you would really like to be able to understand what some of your large fiscal meters do, and that is really, really challenging. One of the other actions that was put forward by Planet Mark is that residents are advised on how to use their heating and hot water. Again, a challenge for us in that really it's just me as sustainability manager. I don't have a team. I work 4 days a week. We have 5 sites. You know, it doesn't take an idiot to work out that that's going to be a particular challenge for us. The infrastructure upgrades. So again, this is the, you know, getting away from fossil fuels over to air source, and then tenant contracts. And the word that horrified me was mandate, because that is very anti what we do at St Monica Trust. One of our 3 C's is about our residents having choice, and so to mandate something is just completely alien and against our key principles. I am aware that obviously in a commercial world, green leases is becoming a very, very normal thing. And even in retirement developments, retirement villages, people are talking about residents having green leases where they would be mandated to choose a green energy supplier. So, you know, it's not completely alien. It's just a really, really difficult one, I think, for us as an organisation to swallow. So really where my focus is now is the infrastructure upgrade. So I'm talking to a number of organisations, and I would like to talk to Amy and Steve after this. But you know, how we tackle that, we've got five sites, all very, very different. We've got listed buildings on 2 of our sites. We have Westbury Fields is a site that's got, well, it's en route that for the district heat system, Bristol's district heat system, should they go from Avonmouth over to Southmead Hospital, which I know will happen in the sort of next decade or so. Westbury Fields is ideally positioned really to take advantage of that. And then our other sites, you know, we have quite large sites in some cases, 12 acres. You know, we have the option of ground source. We're heating both flats and a large 100-bed care home in most cases. So again, you know, do we go down the district heating route and have air source heat pumps all packed together supplying heating? And then we've obviously got to sort of farm it out to the various properties and work out how they pay for that. So that's really where my focus is going at the moment. Karen, if I could have the last slide. Or next slide, sorry. So what have we learned? Don't set a movable deadline. So one of the challenges at the very beginning was the 10-year strategy really wanted a plan by the 31st of March, but I had a devil of job getting actual sign off. So it just moved later and later into the year. And where Planet Mark had been telling me they wanted 9 months to do the piece of work, we ended up with about 6.5 months. And we would have been on time had we not struggled with the investments data. And it's just that came in late, which then made us about 12 days late in the end, which I was still pretty pleased about. Defining the output really clearly, the thing that I was asked about towards the end of the project was about a glossy brochure. And in my head, it was always about substance over style. I never had any kind of visions of, you know, this strategy document or net zero transition plan would be set out in a glossy brochure. But I think it's really important that at the beginning you sort of say, well, what are the deliverables? I'd look, if I was doing it again, I'd wonder whether you could do the work more informally, where it's less pressurized, and actually split the work into just doing the baseline assessment, just because it throws up a lot of information that you then need a bit of time to process and for people to understand. And I think a gap analysis would be really useful, because I talked about data, and sometimes you just don't have the data to be able to move on, and actually gathering that data and putting, you know, metering and monitoring strategies in place to be able to get that data actually takes time. Responsibility, like I say, at the moment, it's just me doing 4 days a week. There isn't really much more than that. I thought when I started to speak to people that everyone would be very, very positive. Everyone wants to tackle climate change. You know, lots of people got kids, lots of people care about the environment, don't they? I was actually surprised by the number of people that don't, or can be quite apathetic about it. And so for anyone that goes into it a bit kind of, everyone's going to love this, they don't. You know, you will hit people that slag off heat pumps, slag off EVs, don't believe in climate change, don't believe it's happening, or don't believe the reasons it's happening, don't think that it's a natural cycle. So just be prepared for that and have your responses ready. And I think where we struggled was at exec level. We lost our director, and they weren't replaced, and so that link between me and the exec team really suffered as a result of that. And I sat in on a presentation that a chief exec of a care organisation was talking about, and she relayed a story how she'd been talking to another chief exec of another care organisation, and they were saying how their net zero plan had really suffered. It wasn't going very well, and she said, "Well, who's leading on it?" And he said, "Well, our FD is." She said, "Oh, so why is your FD leading on it? Is he really interested in climate change?" No, not interested at all. He said, "Well, why is he the person that's leading on it then?" And that for me was a light bulb moment. You just like, if you haven't got the people at the top level that really care about this stuff, and don't mind being unpopular, because some of the stuff that comes out, people don't really want to talk about. And to give you a really easy example is that when we did look at our procurement data and where we were spending our money, of the top 9 suppliers, around about a third of our carbon emissions for purchased goods and services were with staffing agencies. And that's where we struggled to recruit people and keep hold of people. So we're having to spend lots and lots with staffing agencies. And that just is an unpopular story because people don't really want to talk about that. And I know we're not dissimilar to lots of organisations in health and social care, but still people don't really like talking about that. So that's all really I wanted to say today. I hope that was okay. I've got a final slide on there that's got my contact details on. If people do want to chat with me, very, very happy to hear from anyone.
Thank you, Mark. I'll leave that there for a couple of minutes so people can just jot down your number if they need, or your email address. That was really enlightening, and listening to your story, I think it's demonstrates, doesn't it? It's not an easy ride, and you definitely need somebody on your side to champion it with you. I think that's the key message I've taken away from this. Mandate against choice, that's something else, isn't it? Oh, somebody joining us, gosh. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay, so coming back to, so I can see you all, I couldn't see anybody. That was really interesting. Does anybody have any, is there something in the chat? Let me just have a quick look. Simon's contact details. Oh, Amy's got her hand up. Amy?
It's an actual hand up this time, sorry.
Amy and me could probably just talk for hours on end, I reckon.
It was just more of a comment really about, I know you've mentioned kind of that you've struggled to engage people with climate change, and that's something that we've definitely come up against as well. And I just wanted to signpost you to, I don't know if you've come across Britain Talks Climate at all. Really, really useful organisation, but they've basically divided the UK into 7 different segments, and kind of how it's best to communicate climate change messages to different groups, and kind of a lot of the common themes through them as well. And we've found that talking about health and the impact on health is a really kind of good way to do it. I know just from a quick Google that the NHS spends 1.4 billion on treating illnesses associated with cold or damp homes. So if you can come at it from the improving people's lives and not just it'll be great if we could be more sustainable angle, that's something that we found really useful. But yeah, just wanted to mention that.
That's a really interesting point. Lizzie, you're number 2, hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, I'm a manager of a really small home. We're an independent home, so we don't have a massive staffing team to be able to look at this. What would you say is the easiest most achievable thing that we could look at within our home to champion or change, or yeah, try and do our little bit, bearing in mind what our resources are.
Who would, Mark? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to chip in. I would say start somewhere, so at least you're doing something, and just try and get a grip on something. So for me, I felt very comfortable talking about things like energy and water, and just getting that data set up so you can start, looking to see what consumption you've got. Because when it comes to then doing any projects, what you want to be able to evidence is that you've delivered the saving. What you don't want to do is not have that data, do a project, and then at the end of it, you can't then go back and ask for more money to do more projects because you can't evidence that you've spent the money well.
I believe I'm right in saying, Mark, it's that Monica's, they'd embarked on a situation where any food in the kitchen that was unused, rather than sort of bin it, it was put and staff could purchase it, or it was available for staff to have. Is that right?
Yeah, we had
that's another saving.
community fridge. Yeah, so where we had oversupply of food in the kitchens, they boxed it up in takeaway containers. We got a little fridge just for the staff areas, and then staff could come along. They could put money in an honesty box, so they went away with a cheap meal to heat up for tea. And then we had a bit of money in the honesty box, and then that built up, and then we used that for one of the food banks in Bristol. So it's kind of a win-win-win in that we reduced our food waste in our commercial kitchens, staff went away with a hot meal, and we were able to get some money to the food bank as well. And I mean, amazingly, we put that into a national competition, the Waste to Zero Awards, and we actually beat Cranswick, who are the biggest chicken producer in the country. So little old St Monica Trust, and we managed to come top of a £12 billion company. So yeah, it's amazing what you can achieve actually if you just like I say, get a grip, find something small where you can make a real difference.
That's brilliant. Well done. Amy's put the link to the Britain's Talk Climate Change in the chat if any of you would like to copy it. Thank you, Mark. That was really really interesting, really useful actually for anybody embarking or thinking of embarking, and sort of I suspect you might get some phone calls. Amy, would you like to share your videos that you have available? I think that might end our session quite nicely if you're okay with that. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. Bear with me 2 seconds while I just bring back my slides. Right. And there's the moment of truth. Can you hear that? Did you hear it for a second there?
I heard a little noise, but I can't hear anything now. I can see.
Oh, I've paused it now. I just want to check
okay.
You can hear the sound, okay?
No.
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 Okay. In that case, I might stop sharing. And
I think you've got to press when you're sharing. I think there's something you have to press at the bottom. Sound.
Yeah. Could I send you the YouTube link and then you play it instead? I think that might be.
If you can't go, I'm sure I probably won't be able to. I'll tell you what, the slides it's included in the slides, isn't it? And the slides will go out with the recording. So yeah. people can go and have a look at it afterwards.
Yeah, sorry about that.
They wish. Don't worry, it's okay.
There you go. Let me
One more go.
them in the chat.
Okay. All right.
So that's the heat pump one. And
Mhm. So, for those people who are left, thank you very much for joining us today. Special thank you to our presenters. I hope everybody's found it as useful as I have. It's great to be talking about this because it's something that it impacts all of us. And as I think it was Mark said, when you've got children, grandchildren, life is going to, there are some people that are skeptical, but, not everybody can be wrong, can they? So thank you, Amy, for putting them in the chat. I'll leave them there for a little while if anybody wants some time to, but as I say, the recording will be up on the Care and Support West members area. I'm going to stop sharing now. Stop recording rather.